6. Events at the Republican National Convention. Trump campaign officials met with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak during the week of the Republican National Convention. The evidence indicates that those interactions were brief and non-substantive. During platform committee meetings immediately before the convention, J.D. Gordon, a senior campaign advisor on policy and national security, diluted a proposed amendment to the Republican Party platform expressing support for providing, quote, lethal, unquote, assistance to Ukraine in response to Russian aggression. Gordon requested that platform committee personnel revise the proposed amendment to state that only, quote, appropriate, unquote, assistance be provided to Ukraine. The original sponsor of the lethal assistance amendment stated that Gordon told her, the sponsor, that he was on the phone with candidate Trump in connection with his request to dilute the language. Gordon denied making that statement to the sponsor, although he acknowledged it was possible that he mentioned having previously spoken to the candidate about the subject matter. The investigation did not establish that Gordon spoke to or was directed by the candidate to make that proposal. Gordon said that he sought the change because he believed the proposed language was inconsistent with Trump's position on Ukraine. A. Ambassador Kislyak's encounters with Senator Sessions and J.D. Gordon the week of the RNC. In July 2016, Senator Sessions and Gordon spoke at the Global Partners in Diplomacy event, a conference co-sponsored by the State Department and the Heritage Foundation held in Cleveland, Ohio, the same week as the Republican National Convention, also known as RNC or Convention. Approximately 80 foreign ambassadors to the United States, including Kislyak, were invited to the conference. On July 20, 2016, Gordon and Sessions delivered their speeches at the conference. In his speech, Gordon stated in pertinent part that the United States should have better relations with Russia. During Sessions' speech, he took questions from the audience, one of which may have been asked by Kislyak. When the speeches concluded, several ambassadors lined up to greet the speakers. Gordon shook hands with Kislyak and reiterated that he had meant what he said in the speech about improving U.S.-Russian relations. Sessions separately spoke with between 6 and 12 ambassadors, including Kislyak. Although Sessions stated during interviews with the office that he had no specific recollection of what he discussed with Kislyak, he believed that the two spoke for only a few minutes and that they would have exchanged pleasantries and said some things about U.S.-Russia relations. Later that evening, Gordon attended a reception as part of the conference. Gordon ran into Kislyak as the two prepared plates of food, and they decided to sit at the same table to eat. They were joined at the table by the ambassadors from Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, and by Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. As they ate, Gordon and Kislyak talked for what Gordon estimated to have been 3 to 5 minutes, during which Gordon again mentioned that he meant what he said in his speech about improving U.S.-Russia relations. B. Change to Republican Party platform. In preparation for the 2016 convention, foreign policy advisors to the Trump campaign, working with the Republican National Committee, reviewed the 2012 convention's foreign policy platform to identify divergence between the earlier platform and candidate Trump's positions. The campaign team discussed toning down language from the 2012 platform that identified Russia as the country's number one threat, given the candidate's belief that there needed to be better U.S. relations with Russia. The RNC Platform Committee sent the 2016 draft platform to the National Security and Defense Platform Subcommittee on July 10, 2016, the evening before its first meeting to propose amendments. Although only delegates could participate in formal discussions and vote on the platform, the Trump campaign could request changes, and members of the Trump campaign attended committee meetings. John Mashburn, the campaign's policy director, helped oversee the campaign's involvement in the platform committee meetings. He told the office that he directed campaign staff at the convention, including J.D. Gordon, to take a hands-off approach and only to challenge platform planks if they directly contradicted Trump's wishes. On July 11, 2016, Delegate Diana Denman submitted a proposed platform amendment that included provision of armed support for Ukraine. The amendment described Russia's ongoing military aggression in Ukraine and announced support for maintaining and, if warranted, increasing sanctions against Russia until Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity are fully restored, and for providing lethal defensive weapons to Ukraine's armed forces and greater coordination with NATO on defense planning. Gordon reviewed the proposed platform changes, including Denman's. Gordon stated that he flagged this amendment because of Trump's stated position on Ukraine, which Gordon personally heard the candidate say at the March 31st foreign policy meeting, namely that Europeans should take primary responsibility for any assistance to Ukraine, that there should be improved U.S.-Russia relations, and that he did not want to start World War III over that region. Gordon told the office that Trump's statements on the campaign trail following the March meeting underscored those positions to the point where Gordon felt obliged to object to the proposed platform change and seek its dilution. On July 11, 2016, at a meeting of the National Security and Defense Platform Subcommittee, Denman offered her amendment. Gordon and another campaign staffer, Matt Mueller, approached a committee co-chair and asked him to table the amendment to permit further discussion. Gordon's concern with the amendment was the language about providing lethal defensive weapons to Ukraine. Mueller did not have any independent basis to believe that this language contradicted Trump's views and relied on Gordon's recollections of the candidate's views. According to Denman, she spoke with Gordon and Matt Mueller, and they told her that they had to clear the language and that Gordon was talking to New York. Denman told others that she was asked by the two Trump campaign staffers to strike, quote, lethal defense weapons, unquote, from the proposal, but that she refused. Denman recalled Gordon saying that he was on the phone with candidate Trump, but she was skeptical whether that was true. Gordon denied having told Denman that he was on the phone with Trump, although he acknowledged it was possible that he mentioned having previously spoken to the candidate about the subject matter. Gordon's phone records reveal a call to Sessions' office in Washington that afternoon, but do not include calls directly to a number associated with Trump. And according to the president's written answers to the office's questions, he does not recall being involved in the change in the language of the platform amendment. Gordon stated that he tried to reach Rick Dearborn, a senior foreign policy advisor, and Mashburn, the campaign policy director. Gordon stated that he connected with both of them. He could not recall if by phone or in person, and apprised them of the language he took issue with in the proposed amendment. Gordon recalled no objection by either Dearborn or Mashburn, and that all three campaign advisors supported the alternative formulation, quote, appropriate assistance, unquote. Dearborn recalled Gordon warning them about the amendment, but not weighing in because Gordon was more familiar with the campaign's foreign policy stance. Mashburn stated that Gordon reached him, and he told Gordon that Trump had not taken a stance on the issue, and that the campaign should not intervene. When the amendment came up again in the committee's proceedings, the subcommittee changed the amendment by striking the lethal defense weapons language and replacing it with appropriate assistance. Gordon stated that he and the subcommittee co-chair ultimately agreed to replace the language about armed assistance with appropriate assistance. The subcommittee accordingly approved Denman's amendment, but with the term appropriate assistance. Gordon stated that, to his recollection, this was the only change sought by the campaign. Sam Clovis, the campaign's national co-chair and chief policy advisor, stated he was surprised by the change and did not believe it was in line with Trump's stance. Mashburn stated that when he saw the word appropriate assistance, he believed that Gordon had violated Mashburn's directive not to intervene. 7. Post-convention contacts with Kislyak. Ambassador Kislyak continued his efforts to interact with campaign officials with responsibility for the foreign policy portfolio, among them Sessions and Gordon, in the weeks after the convention. The office did not identify evidence in those interactions of coordination between the campaign and the Russian government. A. Ambassador Kislyak invites J.D. Gordon to breakfast at the ambassador's residence. On August 3, 2016, an official from the Embassy of the Russian Federation in the United States wrote to Gordon on behalf of Ambassador Kislyak inviting Gordon to have breakfast/tea with the ambassador at his residence in Washington, D.C. the following week. Gordon responded 5 days later to decline this invitation. He wrote, "These days are not optimal for us as we are busily knocking down a constant stream of false media stories while also preparing for the first debate with HRC. Hope to take a rain check for another time when things quiet down a bit. Please pass along my regards to the ambassador." The investigation did not identify evidence that Gordon made any other arrangements to meet or met with Kislyak after this email. B. Senator Sessions' September 2016 meeting with Ambassador Kislyak. Also in August 2016, a representative of the Russian embassy contacted Sessions' Senate office about setting up a meeting with Kislyak. At the time, Sessions was a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and would meet with foreign officials in that capacity. But Sessions' staff reported, and Sessions himself acknowledged, that meeting requests from ambassadors increased substantially in 2016 as Sessions assumed a prominent role in the Trump campaign, and his name was mentioned for potential cabinet-level positions in a future Trump administration. On September 8, 2016, Sessions met with Kislyak in his Senate office. Sessions said that he believed he was doing the campaign a service by meeting with foreign ambassadors, including Kislyak. He was accompanied in the meeting by at least two of his Senate staff, Sandra Luff, his legislative director, and Pete Landrum, who handled military affairs. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. Sessions voiced concerns about Russia's sale of a missile defense system to Iran, Russia's planes buzzing U.S. military assets in the Middle East, and Russian aggression in emerging democracies such as Ukraine and Moldova. Kislyak offered explanations on these issues and complained about NATO land forces in former Soviet bloc countries that border Russia. Landrum recalled that Kislyak referred to the presidential campaign as, quote, an interesting campaign, unquote, and Sessions also recalled that Kislyak said that the Russian government was receptive to the overtures Trump had laid out during his campaign. None of the attendees, though, remembered any discussion of Russian election interference or any request that Sessions convey information from the Russian government to the Trump campaign. During the meeting, Kislyak invited Sessions to further discuss U.S.-Russia relations with him over a meal at the ambassador's residence. Sessions was non-committal when Kislyak extended the invitation. After the meeting ended, Luff advised Sessions against accepting the one-on-one meeting with Kislyak, whom she assessed to be an, quote, old-school KGB guy, unquote. Neither Luff nor Landrum recalled that Sessions followed up on the invitation or made any further effort to dine with or meet with Kislyak before the November 2016 election. Sessions and Landrum recalled that after the election, some efforts were made to arrange a meeting between Sessions and Kislyak. According to Sessions, the request came through CNI and would have involved a meeting between Sessions and Kislyak, two other ambassadors, and the governor of Alabama. Sessions, however, was in New York on the day of the anticipated meeting and was unable to attend. The investigation did not identify evidence that the two men met at any point after their September 8th meeting. 8. Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort served on the Trump campaign, including a period as campaign chairman from March to August 2016. Manafort had connections to Russia through his prior work for Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, and later through his work for a pro-Russian regime in Ukraine. Manafort stayed in touch with these contacts during the campaign period through Konstantin Kilimnik, a longtime Manafort employee who previously ran Manafort's office in Kiev and who the FBI assesses to have ties to Russian intelligence. Manafort instructed Rick Gates, his deputy on the campaign and longtime employee, to provide Kilimnik with updates on the Trump campaign, including internal polling data, although Manafort claims not to recall that specific instruction. Manafort expected Kilimnik to share that information with others in Ukraine and with Deripaska. Gates periodically sent such polling data to Kilimnik during the campaign. Footnote: on August 21, 2018, Manafort was convicted in the Eastern District of Virginia on 8 tax, foreign bank account registration, and bank fraud charges. On September 14, 2018, Manafort pleaded guilty in the District of Columbia to 1. Conspiracy to defraud the United States and conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States, parentheses, money laundering, tax fraud, FBAR, Foreign Agent Registration Act, and Foreign Agent Registration Act false statements, in parentheses, and 2. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, parentheses, witness tampering, end parentheses. Manafort also admitted criminal conduct with which he had been charged in the Eastern District of Virginia, but as to which the jury hung. The conduct at issue in both cases involved Manafort's work in Ukraine and the money he earned for that work, as well as crimes after the Ukraine work ended. On March 7, 2019, Manafort was sentenced to 47 months of imprisonment in the Virginia prosecution. On March 13th, the district court in D.C. sentenced Manafort to a total term of 73 months, 60 months on the count 1 conspiracy, with 30 of those months to run concurrent to the Virginia sentence, and 13 months on the count 1 conspiracy to be served consecutive to the other 2 sentences. The 2 sentences resulted in a total term of 90 months. Footnote: as noted in Volume 1, Section 3, Gates pleaded guilty to 2 criminal charges in the District of Columbia, including making a false statement to the FBI pursuant to a plea agreement. He has provided information and in-court testimony that the office has deemed to be reliable. Manafort also twice met Kilimnik in the United States during the campaign period and conveyed campaign information. The second meeting took place on August 2, 2016 in New York City. Kilimnik requested the meeting to deliver in person a message from former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, who was then living in Russia. The message was about a peace plan for Ukraine, and Manafort has since acknowledged was a backdoor means for Russia to control eastern Ukraine. Several months later, after the presidential election, Kilimnik wrote an email to Manafort expressing the view, which Manafort later said he shared, that the plan's success would require U.S. support to succeed. All that is required to start the process is a very minor wink or slight push from Donald Trump. The email also stated that if Manafort were designated as the U.S. representative and started the process, Yanukovych would ensure his reception in Russia, quote, at the very top level, unquote. Manafort communicated with Kilimnik about peace plans for Ukraine on at least 4 occasions after their first discussion on the topic on August 2nd. December 2016, the Kilimnik email described above, January 2017, February 2017, and again in the spring of 2018. The office reviewed numerous Manafort email and text communications and asked President Trump about the plan in written questions. The investigation did not uncover evidence of Manafort's passing along information about Ukrainian peace plans to the candidate or anyone else in the campaign or the administration. The office was not, however, able to gain access to all of Manafort's electronic communications. In some instances, messages were sent using encryption applications. And while Manafort denied that he spoke to members of the Trump campaign or the new administration about the peace plan, he lied to the office and the grand jury about the peace plan and his meetings with Kilimnik, and his unreliability on this subject was among the reasons that the district judge found that he breached his cooperation agreement. The office could not reliably determine Manafort's purpose in sharing internal polling data with Kalimnik during the campaign period. Manafort, redacted, did not see a downside to sharing campaign information and told Gates that his role in the campaign would be good for business and potentially a way to be made whole for work he previously completed in the Ukraine. Footnote. According to the president's written answers, he does not remember Manafort communicating to him any particular positions that Ukraine or Russia would want the United States to support. Footnote. Manafort made several false statements during the debriefings. Based on that conduct, the office determined that Manafort had breached his plea agreement and could not be a cooperating witness. The judge presiding in Manafort's D.C. criminal case found by a preponderance of the evidence that Manafort intentionally made multiple false statements to the FBI, the office, and the grand jury concerning his interactions and communications with Kalimnik and concerning 2 other issues. Although the report refers at times to Manafort's statements, it does so only when those statements are sufficiently corroborated to be trustworthy, to identify issues on which Manafort's untruthful responses may themselves be of evidentiary value, or to provide Manafort's explanations for certain events, even when we were unable to determine whether that explanation was credible. As to Deripaska, Manafort claimed that by sharing campaign information with him, Deripaska might see value in their relationship and resolve a disagreement, a reference to one or more outstanding lawsuits. Because of questions about Manafort's credibility and our limited ability to gather evidence on what happened to the polling data after it was sent to Kalimnik, the office could not assess what Kalimnik or others he may have given it to did with it. The office did not identify evidence of a connection between Manafort's sharing polling data and Russia's interference in the election, which had already been reported by U.S. media outlets at the time of the August 2nd meeting. The investigation did not establish that Manafort otherwise coordinated with the Russian government on its election interference efforts. A. Paul Manafort's ties to Russia and Ukraine. Manafort's Russian contacts during the campaign and transition periods stem from his consulting work for Deripaska from approximately 2005 to 2009 and his separate political consulting work in Ukraine from 2005 to 2015, including through his company DMP International LLC. Kalimnik worked for Manafort in Kiev during this entire period and continued to communicate with Manafort through at least June 2018. Kalimnik, who speaks and writes Ukrainian and Russian, facilitated many of Manafort's communications with Deripaska and Ukrainian oligarchs. 1. Oleg Deripaska consulting work. In approximately 2005, Manafort began working for Deripaska, a Russian oligarch who has a global empire involving aluminum and power companies and who is closely aligned with Vladimir Putin. A memorandum describing work that Manafort performed for Deripaska in 2005 regarding the post-Soviet republics referenced the need to brief the Kremlin and the benefits that the work could confer on the Putin government. Gates described the work Manafort did for Deripaska as political risk insurance and explained that Deripaska used Manafort to install friendly political officials in countries where Deripaska had business interests. Manafort's company earned tens of millions of dollars from its work for Deripaska and was loaned millions of dollars by Deripaska as well. In 2007, Deripaska invested through another entity in Pericles Emerging Market Partners, LP, an investment fund created by Manafort and former Manafort business partner Richard Davis. The Pericles Fund was established to pursue investments in Eastern Europe. Deripaska was the sole investor. Gates stated in interviews with the office that the venture led to a deterioration of the relationship between Manafort and Deripaska. In particular, when the fund failed, litigation between Manafort and Deripaska ensued. Gates stated that by 2009, Manafort's business relationship with Deripaska had dried up. According to Gates, various interactions with Deripaska and his intermediaries over the past few years have involved trying to resolve the legal dispute. As described above, in 2016, Manafort, Gates, Kilimnik, and others engaged in efforts to revive the Deripaska relationship and resolve the litigation. Roman numeral 2, political and consulting work. Through Deripaska, Manafort was introduced to Rinat Akhmetov, a Ukrainian oligarch who hired Manafort as a political consultant. In 2005, Akhmetov hired Manafort to engage in political work supporting the Party of Regions, a political party in Ukraine that was generally understood to align with Russia. Manafort assisted the Party of Regions in regaining power, and its candidate, Viktor Yanukovych, won the presidency in 2010. Manafort became a close and trusted political advisor to Yanukovych during his time as president of Ukraine. Yanukovych served in that role until 2014 when he fled to Russia amidst popular protests. 3. Konstantin Kilimnik. Kilimnik is a Russian national who has lived in both Russia and Ukraine and was a longtime Manafort employee. Kilimnik had a direct and close access to Yanukovych and his senior entourage, and he facilitated communications between Manafort and his clients, including Yanukovych and multiple Ukrainian oligarchs. Kilimnik also maintained a relationship with Deripaska's deputy, Viktor Boyarkin, a Russian national who previously served in the Defense Attaché Office of the Russian Embassy to the United States. Manafort told the office that he did not believe Kilimnik was working as a Russian spy. The FBI, however, assesses that Kilimnik has ties to Russian intelligence. Several pieces of the office's evidence, including witness interviews and emails obtained through court-authorized search warrants, support that assessment. Kilimnik was born April 27, 1970, in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, then of the Soviet Union, and attended the Military Institute of the Ministry of Defense from 1987 to 1992. Sam Patton, a business partner to Kilimnik, stated that Kilimnik told him that he was a translator in the Russian army for 7 years and that he later worked in the Russian armament industry selling arms and military equipment. U.S. government visa records reveal that Kilimnik obtained a visa to travel to the United States with a Russian diplomatic passport in 1997. Kilimnik worked for the International Republican Institute's Moscow office, where he did translation work and general office management from 1998 to 2005. While another official recalled the incident differently, one former associate of Kilimnik's at the IRI, told the FBI that Kilimnik was fired from his post because his links to Russian intelligence were too strong. The same individual stated that it was well known that IRI, that Kilimnik had links to the Russian government. Jonathan Hawker, a British national who was a public relations consultant at FTI Consulting, worked with DMI on a public relations campaign for Yanukovych. After Hawker's work for DMI ended, Kilimnik contacted Hawker about working for the Russian government entity on a public relations project that would promote, in Western and Ukrainian media, Russia's position on its 2014 invasion of Crimea. Gates suspected that Kilimnik was a spy, a view that he shared with Manafort, Hawker, and Alexander Vanderswan, an attorney who had worked with DMI on a report for the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Redacted. B. Contacts during Paul Manafort's time with the Trump campaign. 1. Paul Manafort joins the campaign. Manafort served on the Trump campaign from late March to August 19, 2016. On March 29, 2016, the campaign announced that Manafort would serve as the Trump campaign's convention manager. On May 19, 2016, Manafort was promoted to campaign chairman and chief strategist, and Gates, who had been assisting Manafort on the campaign, was appointed deputy campaign chairman. Thomas Barrack and Roger Stone both recommended Manafort to candidate Trump. In early 2016, at Manafort's request, Barrack suggested to Trump that Manafort join the campaign to manage the Republican convention. Stone had worked with Manafort from approximately 1980 until the mid-1990s through various consulting and lobbying firms. Manafort met Trump in 1982 when Trump hired the Black, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly lobbying firm. Over the years, Manafort saw Trump at political and social events in New York City and at Stone's wedding, and Trump requested VIP status at the 1988 and 1996 Republican conventions worked by Manafort. Footnote: Van der Zwaan pleaded guilty in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia to making false statements to the special counsel's office. Footnote: Manafort said in an interview that Gates had joked with Kilimnik about Kilimnik's going to meet with his KGB handler. According to Gates, in March 2016, Manafort traveled to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida to meet with Trump. Trump hired him at that time. Manafort agreed to work on the campaign without pay. Manafort had no meaningful income at this point in time, but resuscitating his domestic political campaign career could be financially beneficial in the future. Gates reported that Manafort intended, if Trump won the presidency, to remain outside the administration and monetize his relationship with the administration. 2. Paul Manafort's campaign period contacts. Immediately upon joining the campaign, Manafort directed Gates to prepare for his review separate memoranda addressed to Deripaska, Akhmetov, Serhiy Lyavachkin, and Boris Kolesnikov, the last three being Ukrainian oligarchs who were senior opposition bloc officials. The memoranda described Manafort's appointment to the Trump campaign and indicated his willingness to consult on Ukrainian politics in the future. On March 30, 2016, Gates emailed the memoranda and a press release announcing Manafort's appointment to Kilimnik for translation and dissemination. Manafort later followed up with Kilimnik to ensure his messages have been delivered, emailing on April 11, 2016, to ask whether Kilimnik had shown, quote, "our friends," unquote, the media coverage of his new role. Kilimnik replied, "Absolutely, every article." Manafort further asked, "How do we use to get whole? Has Gov't," meaning Oleg Vladimirovich Deripaska, "operation seen?" Kilimnik wrote back the same day, "Yes, I have been sending everything to Viktor Boyarkin, Deripaska's deputy, who has been forwarding the coverage directly to OVD." Gates reported that Manafort said that being hired on the campaign would be good for business and increase the likelihood that Manafort would be paid the approximately $2 million he was owed for previous political consulting work in Ukraine. Gates also explained to the office that Manafort thought his role in the campaign could help confirm that Deripaska had dropped the Pericles lawsuit, and that Gates believed Manafort sent polling data to Deripaska, as discussed further below, so that Deripaska would not move forward with his lawsuit with Manafort. Gates further stated that Deripaska wanted a visa to the United States, that Deripaska could believe that having Manafort in a position inside the campaign or administration might be helpful to Deripaska, and that Manafort's relationship with Trump could help Deripaska in other ways as well. Gates stated, however, that Manafort never told him anything specific about what, if anything, Manafort might be offering Deripaska. Gates also reported that Manafort instructed him in April 2016 or early May 2016 to send Kilimnik campaign internal polling data and other updates so that Kilimnik in turn could share it with Ukrainian oligarchs. Gates understood that the information would also be shared with Deripaska. Redacted. Gates reported to the office that he did not know why Manafort wanted him to send polling information, but Gates thought it was a way to showcase Manafort's work, and Manafort wanted to open doors to jobs after the Trump campaign ended. Gates said that Manafort's instruction included sending internal polling data prepared for the Trump campaign by pollster Tony Fabrizio. Fabrizio had worked with Manafort for years and was brought into the campaign by Manafort. Gates stated that, in accordance with Manafort's instruction, he periodically sent Kalimnik polling data via WhatsApp. Gates then deleted the communications on a daily basis. Gates further told the office that after Manafort left the campaign in mid-August, Gates sent Kalimnik polling data less frequently, and that the data he sent was more publicly available information and less internal data. Gates' account about polling data is consistent, redacted, with multiple emails that Kalimnik sent to U.S. associates and press contacts between late July and mid-August of 2016. Those emails referenced internal polling, described the status of the Trump campaign and Manafort's role in it, and assessed Trump's prospects for victory. Manafort did not acknowledge instructing Gates to send Kalimnik internal data. Redacted. Footnote. In a later interview with the office, Gates stated that Manafort directed him to send polling data to Kalimnik after a May 7, 2016 meeting between Manafort and Kalimnik in New York, discussed in Volume 1, Section 4. The office also obtained contemporaneous emails that shed light on the purpose of the communications with Deripaska and that are consistent with Gates' account. For example, in response to a July 7, 2016 email from a Ukrainian reporter about Manafort's failed Deripaska-backed investment, Manafort asked Kalimnik whether there had been any movement on, quote, this issue with our friend, unquote. Gates stated that our friend likely referred to Deripaska, and Manafort told the office that the issue and our biggest interest, as stated below, was a solution to the Deripaska-Pericles issue. Kalimnik replied, I am carefully optimistic on the question of our biggest interest. Our friend Boyarkin said there is lately significant more attention to the campaign in his boss's, Deripaska's, mind, and he will be most likely looking for ways to reach out to you pretty soon, understanding all the time sensitivity. I am more than sure that it will be resolved and we will get back to the original relationship with V's boss, Deripaska. 8 minutes later, Manafort replied that Kalimnik should tell Boyarkin's boss, a reference to Deripaska, that if he needs private briefings, we can accommodate. Manafort has alleged to the office that he was willing to brief Deripaska only on public campaign matters and gave an example. Why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. Manafort noted that if Trump won, Deripaska would want to use Manafort to advance whatever interest Deripaska had in the United States and elsewhere. 3. Paul Manafort's 2 campaign period meetings with Konstantin Kalimnik in the United States. Manafort twice met with Kalimnik in person during the campaign period, once in May and again in August 2016. The first meeting took place on May 7, 2016 in New York City. In the days leading to the meeting, Kalimnik had been working to gather information about the political situation in Ukraine. That included information gleaned from a trip that the former Party of Regions official Yuri Boyko had recently taken to Moscow, a trip that likely included meetings between Boyko and high-ranking Russian officials. Kalimnik then traveled to Washington, D.C. on or about May 5, 2016. While in Washington, Kalimnik had prearranged meetings with State Department employees. Late on the evening of May 6th, Gates arranged for Kalimnik to take a 3 a.m. train to meet Manafort in New York for breakfast on May 7th. According to Manafort, during the meeting, he and Kalimnik talked about events in Ukraine, and Manafort briefed Kalimnik on the Trump campaign, expecting Kalimnik to pass the information back to individuals in Ukraine and elsewhere. Manafort stated that opposition bloc members recognized Manafort's position on the campaign was an opportunity, but Kalimnik did not ask for anything. Kalimnik spoke about a plan of Boyko to boost election participation in the eastern zone of Ukraine, which was the base for the opposition bloc. Kalimnik returned to Washington, D.C. right after the meeting with Manafort. Manafort met with Kilimnik a second time at the Grand Havana Club in New York City on the evening of August 2, 2016. The events leading to the meeting are as follows. On July 28, 2016, Kilimnik flew from Kiev to Moscow. The next day, Kilimnik wrote to Manafort requesting that they meet, using coded language about a conversation he had that day. In an email with a subject line, Black Caviar, Kilimnik wrote, I met today with the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar several years ago. We spent about 5 hours talking about his story, and I have several important messages from him to you. He asked me to go and brief you on our conversation. I said I have to run it by you first, but in principle I am prepared to do it. It has to do about the future of his country and is quite interesting. Manafort identified, quote, the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar, unquote, as Yanukovych. He explained that in 2010, he and Yanukovych had lunch to celebrate the recent presidential election. Yanukovych gave Manafort a large jar of black caviar that was worth approximately $30,000 to $40,000. Manafort's identification as Yanukovych as the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar is consistent with Kilimnik being in Moscow, where Yanukovych resided, when Kilimnik wrote, I met today with the guy, and with a December 2016 email in which Kilimnik referred to Yanukovych as BG, redacted. Manafort replied to Kilimnik's July 29 email, quote, Tuesday, August 2nd is best. Tuesday or Wednesday in New York City, unquote. 3 days later, on July 31st, 2016, Kilimnik flew back to Kiev from Moscow, and on that same day wrote to Manafort that he needed about 2 hours for their meeting, because it's a long caviar story to tell. Kilimnik wrote that he would arrive at JFK on August 2nd at 7:30 p.m., and he and Manafort agreed to a late dinner that night. Documentary evidence, including flight, phone, and hotel records and the timing of the text messages exchanged, confirms the dinner took place as planned on August 2nd. As to the contents of the meeting itself, the accounts of Manafort and Gates, who arrived late to the dinner, differ in certain respects, but their versions of events, when assessed alongside available documentary evidence and what Kilimnik told business associate Sam Patton, indicate that at least 3 principal topics were discussed. First, Manafort and Kilimnik discussed a plan to resolve the ongoing political problems in Ukraine by creating an autonomous republic in its more industrialized eastern region of Donbass, and having Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president ousted in 2014, elected to head that republic. That plan, Manafort later acknowledged, constituted a backdoor means for Russia to control eastern Ukraine. Footnote. Deripaska's private plane also flew to Teterboro Airport in New Jersey on the evening of August 2nd. According to Customs and Borders Protection records, the only passengers on the plane were Deripaska's wife, daughter, mother, and father-in-law, and separate records obtained by our office confirm that Kilimnik flew on a commercial flight to New York. Footnote. The Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics, which are located in the Donbass region of Ukraine, declared themselves independent in response to the popular unrest in 2014 that removed President Yanukovych from power. Pro-Russian Ukrainian militia forces with backing from the Russian military have occupied the region since 2014. Under the Yanukovych-backed plan, Russia would assist in withdrawing the military, and Donbass would become an autonomous region within Ukraine with its own prime minister. The plan emphasized that Yanukovych would be an ideal candidate to bring peace to the region as prime minister of the republic and facilitate the reintegration of the region into Ukraine with the support of the U.S. and Russian presidents. As noted above, according to Redacted, the written documentation describing the plan for the plan to work, both U.S., Russian support were necessary. Manafort initially said that if he had not cut off the discussion, Kilimnik would have asked Manafort in the August 2nd meeting to convince Trump to come out in favor of the peace plan, and Yanukovych would have expected Manafort to use his connections in Europe and Ukraine to support the plan. Manafort also initially told the office that he had said to Kilimnik that the plan was crazy, that the discussion ended, and that he did not call Kilimnik asking Manafort to reconsider the plan after their August 2nd meeting. Manafort said, redacted, that he reacted negatively to Yanukovych sending, years later, a, quote, urgent request when Yanukovych needed him. When confronted with an email written by Kilimnik and Gov't, December 2nd, 2016, however, Manafort acknowledged Kilimnik raised the peace plan again in that email. Manafort ultimately acknowledged Kilimnik also raised the peace plan in January and February 2017 meetings, with Manafort redacted. Second, Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the state of the Trump campaign and Manafort's plan to win the election. That briefing encompassed the campaign's messaging and its internal polling data. According to Gates, it also included discussion of, quote, battleground states, which Manafort identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Manafort did not refer explicitly to battleground states in his telling of the August 2nd discussion. Redacted. Third, according to Gates and what Kilimnik told Patton, Manafort and Kilimnik discussed two sets of financial disputes related to Manafort's previous work in the region. Those consisted of the unresolved Deripaska lawsuit and the funds that the opposition bloc owed to Manafort for his political consulting work, and how Manafort might be able to obtain payment. After the meeting, Gates and Manafort both stated that they separately left from Kilimnik because they knew the media was tracking Manafort and wanted to avoid media reporting on his connections to Kilimnik. C. Post-resignation activities. Manafort resigned from the Trump campaign in mid-August 2016, approximately 2 weeks after his second meeting with Kilimnik, amidst negative media reporting about his political consulting work for the pro-Russia party of regions in Ukraine. Despite his resignation, Manafort continued to offer advice to various campaign officials through the November election. Manafort told Gates that he still spoke with Kushner, Bannon, and candidate Trump, and some of those post-resignation contacts are documented in emails. For example, on October 21, 2016, Manafort sent Kushner an email and attached a strategy memorandum proposing that the campaign make the case against Clinton, quote, as the failed and corrupt champion of the establishment, unquote, and that Wikipedia provides the Trump campaign the ability to make the case in a very credible way by using the words of Clinton in its campaign officials and DNC members. Later, in a November 5, 2016 email to Kushner entitled, Securing the Victory, Manafort said that he was really feeling good about our prospects on Tuesday and focusing on preserving the victory, and that he was concerned the Clinton campaign would respond to a loss by moving immediately to discredit the Trump victory and claim voter fraud and cyber fraud, including the claim that the Russians have hacked into the voting machines and tampered with results. Trump was elected president on November 8, 2016. Manafort told the office that, in the wake of Trump's victory, he was not interested in an administration job. Manafort instead preferred to stay on the outside and monetize his campaign position to generate business, given his familiarity and relationship with Trump and the incoming administration. Manafort appeared to follow that plan as he traveled to the Middle East, Cuba, South Korea, Japan, and China, and was paid to explain what a Trump presidency would entail. Manafort's activities in early 2017 included meetings relating to Ukraine and Russia. The first meeting, which took place in Madrid, Spain on January 2017, was with Georgy Oganov. Oganov, who had previously worked at the Russian embassy in the United States, was a senior executive at a Deripaska company and was believed to report directly to Deripaska. Manafort initially denied attending the meeting. When he later acknowledged it, he claimed that the meeting had been arranged by his lawyers and concerned only the Pericles lawsuit. Other evidence, however, provides reason to doubt Manafort's statement that the sole topic of the meeting was the Pericles lawsuit. In particular, text messages to Manafort from a number associated with Kilimnik suggest that Kilimnik and Boyarkin, not Manafort's counsel, had arranged the meeting between Manafort and Oganev. Kilimnik's message states that the meeting was supposed to be not about money or Pericles, but instead about recreating the old friendship, ostensibly between Manafort and Deripaska, and talking about global politics. Manafort also replied by text that he, quote, needs this finished before January 20th, unquote, which appears to be a reference to resolving Pericles before the inauguration. On January 15, 2017, 3 days after his return from Madrid, Manafort emailed K.T. McFarlane, who was at the time designated to be Deputy National Security Advisor and was formally appointed to that position on January 20th, 2017. Manafort's January 15th email to McFarlane stated, I have some important information I want to share that I picked up on my travels over the last month. Manafort told the office that the email referred to an issue regarding Cuba, not Russia or Ukraine, and Manafort had traveled to Cuba in the past month. Either way, McFarlane, who was advised by Flynn not to respond to the Manafort inquiry, appears not to have responded to Manafort. Manafort told the office that around the time of the presidential inauguration in January, he met with Kilimnik and Ukrainian oligarch Serhiy Lyovachkin at the Westin Hotel in Alexandria, Virginia. During this meeting, Kilimnik again discussed the Yanukovych peace plan that he had broached at the August 2nd meeting and in a detailed December 8, 2016 message found in Kilimnik's DMP email account. In that December 8th email, which Manafort acknowledged having read, Kilimnik wrote, all that is required to start the process is very minor wink or slight push from DT, an apparent reference to President-elect Trump, and a decision to authorize you to be a special representative and manage this process. Kilimnik assured Manafort with that authority that he could start the process and within 10 days visit Russia. Yanukovych guarantees your reception at the very top level, and that DT could have peace in Ukraine basically within a few months after inauguration. As noted above, redacted, and statements to the office, Manafort sought to qualify his engagement on and support for the plan. Redacted, 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 redacted. On February 26, 2017, Manafort met Kilimnik in Madrid, where Kilimnik had flown from Moscow. In his first two interviews with the office, Manafort denied meeting with Kilimnik on his Madrid trip, and then, after being confronted with documentary evidence that Kilimnik was in Madrid at the same time as him, recognized that he met with him in Madrid. Manafort said that Kilimnik had updated him on a criminal investigation into so-called black ledger payments to Manafort that was being conducted by Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Redacted. Footnote, in resolving whether Manafort breached his cooperation plea agreement by lying to the office, the district court found that Manafort lied about, among other things, his contacts with Kilimnik regarding the peace plan, including the meeting in Madrid. Redacted. Manafort remained in contact with Kilimnik throughout 2017 and into spring of 2018. These contacts include matters pertaining to the criminal charges brought by the office and the Ukraine peace plan. In early 2018, Manafort retained his longtime polling firm to craft a draft poll in Ukraine, sent the pollsters a 3-page primer on the plan sent by Kilimnik, and worked with Kilimnik to formulate the polling questions. The primer sent to the pollsters specifically called for the United States and President Trump to support the Autonomous Republic of Donbass with Yanukovych as Prime Minister, and a series of questions in the draft poll asked for opinions on Yanukovych's role in resolving the conflict in Donbass. The poll was not solely about Donbass. It also sought participants' view on leaders apart from Yanukovych as they pertain to the 2019 Ukraine presidential election. The office has not uncovered evidence that Manafort brought the Ukraine peace plan to the attention of the Trump campaign or the Trump administration. Kilimnik continued his efforts to promote the peace plan to the executive branch, e.g., U.S. Department of State, in the summer 2018. B. Post-election and transition period contacts. Trump was elected president on November 8, 2016. Beginning immediately after the election, individuals connected to the Russian government started contacting officials on the Trump campaign and transition team through multiple channels, sometimes through Russian Ambassador Kislyak and other times through individuals who sought reliable contacts for the U.S. persons not formally tied to the campaign or transition team. The most senior levels of the Russian government encouraged these efforts. The investigation did not establish that these efforts reflected or constituted coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia in its election interference activities. 1. Immediate post-election activity. As soon as news broke that Trump had been elected president, Russian government officials and prominent Russian businessmen began trying to make inroads into the new administration. They appeared not to have pre-existing contacts and struggled to connect with senior officials around the president-elect. As explained below, those efforts entail both official contact through the Russian embassy in the United States and outreaches sanctioned at high levels of the Russian government through business rather than political contacts. A. Outreach from the Russian government. At approximately 3 a.m. on election night, Trump campaign press secretary Hope Hicks received a telephone call on her personal cell phone from a person who sounded foreign but was calling from a number with a D.C. area code. Although Hicks had a hard time understanding the person, she could make out the words, "Putin call." Hicks told the caller to send her an email. The following morning on November 9, 2016, Sergei Kuznetsov, an official at the Russian embassy to the United States, emailed Hicks from his Gmail address with the subject line, "Message from Putin." Attached to the email was a message from Putin in both English and Russian, which Kuznetsov asked Hicks to convey to the president-elect. In the message, Putin offered his congratulations to Trump for his electoral victory, stating he looked forward to working with Trump on leading Russian-American relations out of crisis. Hicks forwarded the email to Kushner asking, "Can you look into this? Don't want to get duped, but don't want to blow off Putin." Kushner stated in congressional testimony that he believed that it would be possible to verify the authenticity of the forwarded email through the Russian ambassador, whom Kushner had previously met in April 2016. Unable to recall the Russian ambassador's name, Kushner emailed Dmitry Simes of CNI, whom he had consulted previously about Russia, see Volume 1, Section 4, and asked, "What is the name of the Russian ambassador?" Kushner forwarded Simes' response, which identified Kislyak by name, to Hicks. After checking with Kushner to see what he had learned, Hicks conveyed Putin's letter to transition officials. 5 days later, on November 14, 2016, Trump and Putin spoke by phone in the presence of transition team members, including incoming National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. B. High-level encouragement of contacts through alternative channels. As Russian officials in the United States reached out to the president-elect and his team, a number of Russian individuals working in the private sector began their own efforts to make contact. Peter Avin, a Russian national who heads Alfa Bank, Russia's largest commercial bank, described to the office interactions with Putin during this period that might account for the flurry of Russian activity. Avin told the office that he is one of approximately 50 wealthy businessmen in Russia who regularly meet with Putin in the Kremlin. These 50 men are often referred to as oligarchs. Avin told the office that he met on a quarterly basis with Putin, including in the fourth quarter of 2016, shortly after the U.S. presidential election. Avin said that he took these meetings seriously and understood that any suggestions or critiques that Putin made during these meetings were implicit directives, and that there would be consequences for Avin if he did not follow through. As was typical, the 2016 fourth quarter meeting with Putin was preceded by a preparatory meeting with Putin's chief of staff, Anton Vino. According to Avin, at his fourth quarter 2016 one-on-one meeting with Putin raised the prospect that the United States would impose additional sanctions on Russian interests, including sanctions against Avin and/or Alfa Bank. Putin suggested that Gov't needed to take steps to protect himself and Alfa Bank. Gov't also testified that Putin spoke of the difficulty faced by the Russian government in getting in touch with the incoming Trump administration. According to Gov't, Putin indicated that he did not know with whom formally to speak and generally did not know the people around the president-elect. Footnote. In an interview with The Office, Gov't referred to the high-ranking Russian government officials using numbers, Official 1, Official 2. Gov't separately confirmed through an attorney proffer that Official 1 was Putin and Official 2 was Putin's Chief of Staff, Vino. Footnote. At the time of his fourth quarter 2016 meeting with Putin, Gov't was generally aware of the press coverage around Russian interference in the U.S. election. According to Gov't, he did not discuss that topic with Putin at any point, and Putin did not mention the rationale behind the threat of new sanctions. Gov't, redacted, told Putin he would take steps to protect himself and the Alfa Bank shareholders from potential sanctions, and one of those steps would be to try to reach out to the incoming administration to establish a line of communication. Gov't described Putin responding with skepticism about Govt's prospect for success. According to Gov't, although Putin did not expressly direct him to reach out to the Trump transition team, Gov't understood that Putin expected him to try to respond to the concerns he raised. Govt's efforts were described in Volume 1, Section 4b. 2. Kirill Dmitriev's transition-era outreach to the incoming administration. Govt's description of his interactions with Putin is consistent with the behavior of Kirill Dmitriev, a Russian national who heads Russia's sovereign wealth fund and is closely connected to Putin. Dmitriev took efforts to meet members of the incoming Trump administration in the months after the election. Dmitriev asked a close business associate who worked for the United Arab Emirates, or UAE, Royal Court, George Nader, to introduce him to Trump transition officials, and Nader eventually arranged a meeting in the Seychelles between Dmitriev and Eric Prince, a Trump campaign supporter and an associate of Steve Bannon. In addition, the UAE National Security Advisor introduced Dmitriev to a hedge fund manager and friend of Jared Kushner, Rick Gerson, in late November 2016. In December 2016 and January 2017, Dmitriev and Gerson worked on a proposal for reconciliation between the United States and Russia, which Dmitriev implied he cleared through Putin. Gerson provided that proposal to Kushner before the inauguration, and Kushner later gave copies to Bannon and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson.